Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Security Boulevard webinar. This is Charlene O'Hanlon. I'm the moderator for the event, and I welcome you. We have a great panel discussion today. I'm really excited about this one. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of it, you will be able to listen to it on demand afterwards. We're going to be sending out an email that will contain a link to access the webinar. And we are taking questions from the audience. So at any time during our presentation, if you have a question for any of our panelists, please don't wait, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. And we'll take probably around 10 minutes or so near the end of the presentation and go through those audience questions. Okay, with that, we're going to get kicked off with today's webinar, which is Cloud Security from Start Point to Endpoint, a panel discussion. Okay, our panelists today, we've got three great ones. Eric Sheridan, who is Chief Scientist at White Hat Security, Rick McElroy, who's Security Strategist at Carbon Black, and Tim Buntel, who's VP of Application Security Products at ThreatStack. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome, awesome. Well, if you guys could, if we could start things by just you guys telling us a little bit about yourselves and your background. Eric, why don't we start with you and we'll just go on down the line.
Sure. Hey, so my name is Eric Sheridan. As Charlene said, I'm the Chief Scientist over here at White Hat Security. I actually have a little over 15 years experience specifically in the application security space, which is very much around the people, process, and technology that it takes to build more secure applications. So I'm excited about today's panel, particularly the topic around the DevSecOps.
Great, Rick, Mr. McElroy.
Yeah, Rick McElroy, Head of Security Strategy for Carbon Black. First off, I wanted to say what an awesome panel. I was a longtime White Hat customer, and ThreatStack's a pretty cool company, so thanks for being on. Yeah, so I've been doing this about 20 years. Started off on the offensive side of the house, working for folks like Booz Allen, breaking into government systems. And then I started building security programs, eventually worked my way up to CISO, and then decided paperwork and politics wasn't for me. No, and then I convinced the co-founders of Carbon Black to come work over here and really focus on helping people with their security strategy.
Great, great. Thanks, Rick. Tim?
Yeah, thanks so much, Charlie. So hi, everybody. I'm Tim Buntel. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. I come from a development background, so started off 20 years ago as a developer myself and spend most of my time in developer tools companies. So Adobe, Atlassian, Microsoft, have done a couple of startups, and then started to realize that security was one attribute of sort of quality of software that had been left out of the process. So got involved with that. I co-founded a company called Bluefire that was recently acquired by ThreatStack. So new addition to the ThreatStack team through that acquisition, but really excited to be here on this topic today.
Great, great. Well, I'm really excited too because of the breadth of your experience across all three of you. So I think we're going to get some really, really interesting insight from all of you. So thanks again for joining me today. Today's event is actually, the discussion is going to be loosely based on an ebook that we just produced with these same name, Cloud Security from Start Point to Endpoint. And it's now going to be available via download on Security Boulevard. And then also attendees of today's event will be receiving a copy via download link following the webinar. Okay, let's go ahead and start the discussion. What we're talking about here. So today's webcast is about cloud security, which I know is a very general topic. But what we'd like to talk about is the state of cloud security today, and then the factors that influence cloud security, and really what folks need to know to ensure that their data stays secure in the cloud. We all know, I mean, unless you've been living under a rock, you know that security is really just critical in today's cloud-based environments. But we do have a couple numbers that I want to show you guys just to kind of illustrate how pervasive the cloud has become, and then we could talk about security from there. So the next slide here, these are some of the numbers that are in the ebook, and they're all from IDC. And I think they paint a pretty clear picture of how big a role the cloud plays in business today. And we've got billions and billions and billions of dollars that are being spent on cloud and cloud services. But at the same time, we've got serious security risks around the cloud, and in the form of data leaks and data breaches. And these numbers here are from Gartner. And I think, again, they paint a pretty clear picture of how difficult cloud security is for many organizations. So, my first question to you guys is, what do you make of these numbers? I mean, what do they tell you? Anybody who wants to start.
Hey, this is Eric. I'll jump in. I think overall the numbers are consistent with my experience, and I think there's a timeliness of today's webinar. I don't know if any of you have seen in any of your news feeds, but the eBay of Japan actually just had all of their application source code disclosed as a result of unintentionally deploying their entire Git repository. And with all this deployment, this DevOps, all this automation, we're deploying things that are putting our users and our organizations at risk. So when we see something like up to 95% of all data leaks in the cloud, that very much resonates with what we're seeing.
Oh, and I just wanted to jump in there because I love what you said. Do you feel like part of the issue is we had insecure processes that we had to speed up and move faster, and then we automated those insecure processes? Because I see a ton of that out there, right?
All right, great. Were you asking somebody that question?
Yeah, that was a question for Eric in the panel.
Oh, I'm
right.
sorry.
Like I just feel like part of this is we're moving really fast. We've embraced automation and orchestration from everything from data center builds to containers, right? But I feel like we didn't have the processes secured prior to doing that, and so we've automated in large part, these large scale infrastructures without actually accounting for security by design, right?
Yeah, certainly. I was just saying, it's like putting a square peg in a round hole. You have a situation where the security teams traditionally were always a little bit behind development teams. But then you have these manifestos and these ideologies like agile development and DevOps, where you're being encouraged as a developer to commit faster, to push faster, to deploy faster. I think the biggest challenge of DevOps and agile, all these movements that we're seeing in the product development community, is not actually on the development teams. I actually think it's on the security team, because now it's that much harder to be responsive to this ever-growing trend of pushing things fast.
Interesting. Tim, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd also suggest that some things are hardly moving at all, that we're kind of glacial in some areas, especially if you look at things like web applications, right? OWASP top 10, more than 15 years now, right? We've been saying that SQL injection is a critical cause of breaches, and yet we continue to make these same problems again and again. So while things speed up in some areas, we still seem to have failed to overcome some of these really well understood basic problems that we have in security, and it's frustrating to see that year in and year out.
Okay. So my question to you guys then is, looking at from an organizational perspective, organizations that are using cloud as a major part of their infrastructure components, why is it so difficult? I mean, why is cloud security such a difficult thing for these companies?
I think that question should be abstracted to why is security so difficult from an organizational perspective.
Right.
And so it's like things I see. I still haven't seen an embracing of security out of a lot of the leaders that are out there in other parts of the organization, right? And so whether that's your CIO, right, and hey, we got to pivot our data center and get all that cost off and get over to infrastructure as a service, or whatever the case may be. I've seen this in a number of organizations where the DevOps teams themselves and the leaders aren't embracing security or trying to design security into their programs. And so I think we still have an organizational cultural problem, and that's just reflected in cloud security today.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I'd say.
Sorry, go ahead.
Tim, why don't you?
Yeah, so there's the people part of it. I think the abstraction is a key from what I see. In the cloud, we're abstracting so much away, and this is great for productivity, right? Because it's less complex for a developer or for the teams managing infrastructure. But that lower complexity also translates into lower visibility, and that's really a central piece of what I see as introducing more risk.
And I guess I'll add to that just by saying that if you as an organization or a team are able to cross some of these bridges, overcome some of these gaps, or at least have a dialogue to make progress in what we believe to be the right direction, you then encounter what I see as a huge skill gap. There's been a number of companies that I've worked for and supported that, for example, had no idea that their development teams or their product teams were using particular cloud technologies. Serverless is a big one we're running into right now. I was speaking to one application or rather security manager recently who swore up and down they did not have any serverless application. But when we ran a basic discovery service, we found they were using serverless, and this person had no idea. And so that was one challenge, right? Knowing these cloud-based technologies are being used. And then the second thing is going to that development team, going to that product team and articulating, having similar nomenclature about these technologies, what security risks they present, and how to speak that same language.
I think, you know what, I think that's a huge thing because, I'm not sure that you could walk into an organization and ask maybe somebody, I don't know, in a marketing department what serverless is, and they would know what it is. So I think I think you're right. I think there needs to be some sort of basic education that happens within these organizations so that people understand when you say serverless, that they understand what you're talking about. But especially since we are kind of moving to this cloud native infrastructure for a lot of organizations who are just trying to get rid of a lot of infrastructure and save money and save footprints and all the reasons why organizations move to cloud. But I also wonder if a lot of companies kind of put the cart before the horse when they moved to the cloud and they didn't really consider all of the security implications of the cloud. What do you guys think?
I would agree with that. I mean, I think the cost benefits make it like the risk is acceptable to organizations, right? And I've seen that, I think, a number of times. And so, so some organizations rushed in. I mean, they didn't even secure their old infrastructure or old platforms and just moved them over to someone else. And sometimes that promise of, hey, they have better security teams or more mature security operations just hasn't proved to be true. I mean, I've had a number of cloud providers that have sort of fallen on their face in that area. And so I think we're all maturing together. And so again, picking the right partners, partnering with them, and then actually seeing them as part of your security team, because they are going to provide services, are going to be huge for the teams out there trying to secure it.
Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, I think folks may have not so much rushed in, but were slow to change the parts of security that are most important to them, right? So whereas, earlier when things were on-prem, you're thinking more about physical security, you're thinking about lower level controls and lower level security. As you're moving to the cloud, you need to really fundamentally rethink that and understand it's more about access controls and data in transit and services talking to one another and these much higher level things. And so if you haven't had your skills and your approach to security adapt to those changes in the way we build applications and deliver value to our customers, then that's going to be a struggle. So it may not have been that they rushed in too quickly, but that their thinking about security wasn't evolving as rapidly as the technologies that we were using to deliver value to customers.
Eric, you agree with that, or you have a different point of view?
I think I largely agree with the sentiment. I think the one thing I will say is a bit of a generalization, admittedly, but also a little bit controversial. If you show me a company that puts building secure software as the #1 priority, I will show you a company that will be out of business within a year. The harsh reality is that if you're building a product, building a company, building an offering, you need to put the user experience to be #1 to generate revenue. So security is always going to be behind. I think the key differentiator for any security individual, team, vendor, is the ability to quickly respond once security, the security as a priority grows within an organization. So how quickly you can respond is really going to set you apart.
Okay. All right. Great.
And that's something where, not to get ahead to sort of DevOps here, but that for me is something where the cloud and DevOps around cloud platforms and technologies is really ideal, right? Because we've been able to have this dramatic reduction in lead time for getting changes into production environments, so we can respond to those problems much more rapidly.
Great. Well, that's actually a perfect seg right into our second slide, our next slide here, which is, introducing DevSecOps. We on our speakers today are all very familiar with the DevSecOps the way of thinking and way of doing, but there may be some certain members of the audience who are less familiar with it. So, I just thought maybe it would be beneficial if we could just talk a little bit about DevSecOps and kind of some of the benefits that it brings. Obviously, it can help by shifting security left in the software development process. It kind of brings security to the forefront in thinking. But guys, since you guys are well versed in this space, what are some of the things that you've seen that DevOps can really bring to organizations, or DevSecOps can bring to organizations that perhaps maybe our panel or our audience members can kind of keep in their back pocket? Eric, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure thing. So I think the first thing it's going to bring is a lot of pain. I'm not going to sugarcoat it one bit. It's going to bring a lot of pain. It is not easy. It's going to make, if you're in the security team and you're responsible for application security, or in the development team, you're responsible for application security. Pro tip, everyone is, right? It's going to be very painful, because the reality is, as you're pushing and moving faster, as I mentioned earlier, security just can't keep up. And I do have a couple of metrics. Shameless plug. At White Hat we have something called the White Hat Stats Report, and there were a couple of numbers I pulled in preparation for this conversation. One thing I will highlight is that for organizations that are not embracing DevSecOps and able to achieve its value, we find that they're actually only able to fix 56% of the critical vulnerabilities that are found in pre-production and production environments. Not only are we finding these critical vulnerabilities late in development, they cannot fix them. The reasons are that they can't backtrack far enough to go address these issues. However, if those same teams start leveraging the automation and technologies, the collaborative tooling early in the development process, we actually see a 50% drop-off in production vulnerabilities. So DevSecOps is painful at the beginning, but if you get it right, there's a lot of benefit with respect to security.
All right. So actually, you say if you get it right. So what are some of the things that organizations can kind of keep in mind then when they do go down this road?
Yeah, the very first thing I would start with is you've got to break this mentality of silos. There cannot be an application security team. There cannot be just a development team. These two need to come together. You need to have a security experts or subject matter experts with security embedded within the development team. And then from there, that collaborative nature will help build and define what processes and what tooling are needed to enable the development team. Not get in the way, not slow them down, but what do they need to keep pace with their world of DevOps, but to find these issues and communicate them as fast as possible. So that's the big first step I would encourage.
Okay, great.
And for me, part of that breaking down that silo is breaking it down in terms of timing as well. So it's not just making sure that the teams identify and work together, but it's bringing awareness of security throughout the entire process, from the design phase through coding, through testing, through operation, right? And security for many organizations is still the last thing that gets bolted on at the very end. It's where quality was 20 years ago, and today we wouldn't imagine a team only thinking about quality or availability or performance just before you ship, and yet we still tend to do that with security. So breaking down the silos of role, but also in terms of where security comes chronologically in the development process, I think is critical.
Okay.
Yeah,
Rick,
any
thoughts?
Yeah, just to talk internally about what I'm seeing from a DevSecOps perspective. So the SOC teams that are out there, right? The incident responders. What you're seeing is they're actually writing, say, detectors as code. And those codes are checked in. There's metrics that are associated with them. And so what you actually have is a more agile ability to address your needs as a security team. Right. So as an example, if I start to change my capabilities as a team and move away from traditional system management, system logins, provisioning access, and start to hire, say, programmers, and bring programmers into my program, well, now I can automate. Now I can start to do some cool orchestration. Now I can actually, in some cases, and I've seen some of the larger shops do this, stop buying commercial products, right? And manage their own gear. And again, those are all choices that the teams will have to make internally. But I can tell you from a detection perspective, DevSecOps is having a great impact to our ability to detect what the bad guys are doing out there. Because your detectors have to be agile, right? And they have to have high fidelity and confidence. And so we're seeing those teams kind of break those gaps. And then I think like medium-sized businesses out there, they're bringing in folks from DevOps. I've seen a number of PowerShell folks that have moved on to security teams from DevOps teams, and I encourage that type of behavior. That is pretty awesome.
So I'm assuming then that you guys all firmly agree that there needs to be a security person on a DevOps team. That's just a no-brainer there.
I think responsibility and education, and it doesn't have to be somebody with an InfoSec title. I've done that in a number of organizations by having what we call security champions. So identifying people who are interested in security, want to learn from your team, and we've actually done things like, let's sit down in a non-prod environment and code through these security issues, right? As a team, like we're going to bring in the people who exploited it, and they're going to sit down with the people that are writing the code. And I think you have a better chance of defending against the next thing if you have that collaboration.
All right, good. All right. So yeah, one thing that I've been thinking about when it comes to DevSecOps is just the idea that it has taken so long for, at least I perceive it's taken so long for us to just realize that security has to be farther up the development process. I mean, why do you guys think it's taken so long, or has it not? And I'm just imagining it.
Humans are slow to change. I'll just throw that out.
All right, that's good. Yeah.
And I don't blame everyone. I mean, look, we have people who are hired from all over the place. So maybe they come from a place with a mature DevOps practice. Maybe they come from a place where they've never had to secure a thing before, right? And so you have this wild variance in the level of InfoSec knowledge and wisdom, and it's really on the InfoSec team to be that education glue in the middle of all of it, right? And so why should they care? Why should they change what they're doing? All of those things. But yeah, I mean, there's still a wild variance in how mature people have coded to before. And frankly, we're probably not doing enough education in the CS programs out there in universities as it regards to security.
Go ahead.
So, I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll underscore that last comment and extend it a little bit by saying it's largely, in my experience, been a culture problem. If you think of sort of the classic and traditional security engineer, They find problems and will communicate that problems, but the way it's communicated, it's kind of like you're kicking the baby, right? It hurts. As a developer, like, I worked on this, and this is painful to hear. But going through that experience of how to articulate and communicate, once you establish that line of communication, it's then, unfortunately, the challenge of the security team to effectively sell the value of the services, capabilities that it's trying to integrate into development to the development team. And so overcome that barrier of communication and having developers gain confidence in what the security team is suggesting is challenging. But once you get that confidence, that's where you can really excel in this space.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, development teams are under a lot of pressure from the business to deliver value through features, right? And since we've historically had security as something that's separate from features that's sort of bolted on, it's been difficult for development teams to say, all right, I'm going to not deliver this sexy, exciting feature so that I can work on security. Even if I had the skills, which I agree with everyone else, we aren't teaching. But if we start to think about security in the same way we think about it about quality, right? This is an attribute of good software. Then it becomes less about saying, do I not work on features in order to work on security? Instead, I say, I'm delivering value to customers through features that are also secure, in the same way that my features are also high quality and performant.
Okay.
Love that statement about security being a QA issue. Love that.
Do you guys also think that part of the problem has been the pace of innovation, that we're just moving so fast that something inevitably is going to get left behind, and unfortunately, what we're seeing is typically it's security?
I can speak from, I can answer that to some extent as it relates in the context of technologies and architectures. We've seen rapid advancement in application architectures, one of which is this transition to microservices.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of development teams and product teams that have these big monolith applications and are deciding that architecturally there is value from a scalability and maintainability perspective to break those monoliths up into even 100 plus small microservices, these small compartmentalized applications that have a special focus. And what we've noticed is that security is there to some extent an afterthought, or security becomes even more of an issue because when you break up this one thing into 100 different things, your attack surface grows a good bit. We've actually found that with every 180,000 lines of code, a microservice application will have 180 vulnerabilities compared to a monolith application, which would only have 39. So as we're going down this architectural transition, the number of vulnerabilities is increasing dramatically. Now, the positive spin on that is that we're seeing microservice development shops actually fix their code faster than monolith applications. So there's this architectural change is just an example of where security is an afterthought, or it's security applications weren't necessarily thought about when that change was made.
So I'm hearing a lot about.
And throw that. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, Eric. I agree 100% with the microservices, and then consider that you're deploying those largely in containers that introduce their own set of security challenges and visibility challenges. When you have containers and you have complex orchestration platforms that are abstracting things away that we would have looked for previously, when we weren't containerizing those workloads.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Sorry, I actually had a question there for the panelists. I believe that was Tim that was just speaking, correct?
That was Tim.
Yeah, that's Tim.
Yeah. Hey, so from your experience, I mean, with containers, working on a development team, a good part of my day, one of the things I constantly hear about in the development community is as you build containers and containerized applications, that there is a bit of a dogmatic line of thinking that the container be consistently reproducible all the time. And on the surface, I get the value of that. But one of the side effects I'm seeing is that containers are being developed. Your goal to master a container or a Docker file that you're using to generate it uses a specific set of dependencies, of third-party libraries. And so when you go and deploy that over time, at some point, those dependencies become out of date. But because you're not auto-updating those containers, those third-party libraries, it introduces vulnerabilities over time. We see a lot of that from the code through software composition analysis. I guess Tim and everyone on the team, do you see that as well in the container space? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. The vulnerable dependencies are application risk regardless of whether they're containerized or not. But I think in what we see is that containers tend to do a very good job of hiding their contents from the teams that are operating them, right? It's hard to know exactly what's in them, what version. You even, not only just across time, but across containers within an orchestrated platform, you can have that sort of drift, whether it's unintentional or intentional. A lot of organizations do, complex blue-green deploys or dark launches, and some of these techniques that have multiple versions of applications running and orchestrated in an environment. So you can get complexity around what's even running in what container. So being able to understand what are all of the containers doing, how are they interoperating with each other, how do payloads change as service call service in these chains of container-based microservices. That's all complexity around visibility. And we see that, our customers struggle with that pretty regularly.
Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and move along here to our next slide, which is securing the endpoint. So that's obviously the endpoint is critical also in security because if you think about the number of mobile devices that we use these days and the fact that the perimeter is no longer set at so many organizations because of mobile workforce, because of the cloud. I think organizations are, they're struggling to secure those endpoints, because we've got an expanded landscape of potential security breaches. So what do you guys think are some of the things that organizations maybe are not considering when they're thinking about endpoint security?
So can I jump in first?
Sure.
I love endpoint security. That's why I wanted to jump in. Look. I think a couple of things. A, they don't consider that the endpoint is the new perimeter. I love how you said that. It's where the innovation is happening for attackers. Frankly speaking, network DDoS is what it is. I own a bunch of devices and then I send a bunch of traffic, right? It's not super innovative. But when you look at what attackers are doing down there, yeah, their goal is pretty much one thing in almost every case. And it starts with credential harvesting, right? So when you look at a typical attacker on an endpoint, or if you said, what are the most things going to cover? Well, first thing they're going to do is get on your endpoint. They'll do that by phishing you. They'll send you some malware, right? Then they want your credentials. Once they have your credentials, they're going to scrape those from memory. They're going to start running around every other system on your network. And then that starts to evolve into what we call island hopping, right? So actually leveraging that infrastructure against a partner or someone in your supply chain, right? And so look, all of that being said, there are, I think, two big things that people can do. One, go get the visibility you need to see what the attackers are doing. On the network side, that's going to involve some network tools. That's going to involve stuff like CASB. You're going to need to look at your accounts in Office 365. I was just on a call yesterday, and yeah, the attacks are occurring in Office 365. Their credential theft is occurring, and then that's starting to pivot. And so it's really tough because, to I think both speakers' earlier point, visibility in the cloud remains a problem, right? Mm-hmm. And so while I can protect my users on the endpoint, it gets a whole lot tougher, and the IR engagements are a little harder to put together when you have like cloud authentication issues, right? So what I tell everyone out there is like, go turn on MFA, and if you haven't even started looking at MFA, like move that product ahead, because what you're going to wind up doing is protecting against a lot of the attacks that are out there, because you have a good process to verify that someone has two-factor and all that good stuff. So yeah, you're going to need both. You're going to need cloud visibility. You're going to need visibility into your network, and you'll need endpoint visibility.
All right, great. So Tim, in your role as the VP of Application Security Products at ThreatStack, are there certain things that you hear some of your customers that are that they're dealing with on a daily basis that they're just really not able to wrap their heads around?
Yeah, so certainly, my focus is primarily at the application level,
Right.
which we've been talking about a lot. But one thing that I would step back and generalize, which touches a bit on this point of endpoints and what the perimeter is. From a development perspective, the cloud has changed how we build our software as well. So our
Right.
CD pipelines are moving into the cloud, and as we have our source code in one service, and we have CI somewhere else, and we're deploying to multiple platforms using different containers and orchestrators, right? So this, the CD pipeline itself becomes, this huge number of of solutions that we have to understand. How do they talk to each other? How do we secure them? How do we make sure that credentials are safely stored for these services as they're passing back and forth? So I think development teams are, as they're leveraging the cloud to reduce some of that complexity, are finding new complexities as well. So we've got all of these classic application level concerns and security problems, but then we also have a pretty big set of new security challenges that come to the application teams who are trying to figure out how all those services fit together to create this really powerful cloud pipeline for software delivery.
Okay. All right, great. So Eric, one thing I wanted to ask you is one of the things that I've been hearing a lot about lately is the security of open source components that a lot of developers are using for in building their applications. And that seems to be kind of a sticking point with security, is the fact that a lot of these open source components that are being used aren't really being managed very well, and as a result, they're resulting in security breaches. I think the Equifax security breach is one of the most prevalent or the most well-known of the examples of that type of security breach. Are you seeing a lot of that happening, and how would you have any advice for folks to better manage those open source components for security issues?
Sure. Yeah, actually, yeah. So when it comes to managing third-party libraries, open source components, that often will fall into the bucket that's called software composition analysis, or SCA. I guess that's your Googleable acronym. So with SCA, that helps us identify vulnerabilities in third-party libraries, along with other artifacts like bill of materials, licensing, and so forth, versioning. We find that vulnerable third-party components is by far the most common vulnerability class we discover as we're testing applications, including mobile applications. And the numbers comes in at around 21%. So 21% of all the vulnerabilities that we find is within this space. So it is a substantial issue. And it affects, if you think of the mobile device as an endpoint, it affects mobile devices and endpoints as well. It's kind of funny, right now we're actually building a mobile-specific application security course. And one of the topics that we talk about is connectivity, like how mobile apps establish connectivity, and how a lot of mobile applications, for one reason or another, do not properly validate certificates. Meaning all these mobile apps transmitting all this sensitive data are subject to classic man-in-the-middle attacks. And a lot of that's because they happen to be using these third-party libraries that just haven't been updated. And so I guess to more succinctly answer your question, I would recommend that security teams and development teams work together to establish a bill of materials, what actually goes into producing my applications, what version, and have an alerting system in place and a plan in place for when there is another Equifax incident where, let's say, Strut2 comes out with yet another vulnerability. Like, how do you handle that? How do you know what applications are actually running that version? Where are they deployed? These are hard operational questions that require some forethought. And I would expect to see this class of vulnerability continue to grow for the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I love that answer. Like, that's 100, because it does get a little philosophical, right? With like open source versus other things. But what I would point out, in particular to the breach that we're speaking of, is that patch was available. And again, good patch management, whether that's third-party open source software or your operating systems. Like the fact that we don't have that nailed yet still is greatly concerning to me, right? Because that's a standard process. I mean, I don't actually remember the last time a Windows update broke a Windows box. Maybe like I think there was a SQL patch or something that might have went wonky. But look, we've driven up QA. We have automated testing. We can tell when microservices are running. I think we need to apply like that same look to security and just tighten those basic controls up too, right?
That makes sense. Tim, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with everybody else here. You know, again, I'll point to things like containers is making this even harder, right? So understanding what version of what components are running across your landscape of different containers and microservices again as well. So it's not simply a matter of a vulnerable component, but it's a vulnerable component that's called by 3 layers deep of other services. And so this is where that visibility becomes so important to understand what exactly is running where, what versions of things. It's not just which are vulnerable, but it's understanding what's being utilized and by what other services. So these are all things that the cloud giveth and the cloud taketh away, right? So we get this benefit of you know, reduced complexity, but increased complexity in other areas. All
right, great. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next. I kind of have a feeling that the whole endpoint security problem is pervasive among pretty much any company that they're seeing increased security threats as their perimeter expands. So just real quick, just some of the tips from the ebook for securing endpoints. This really has nothing to do with the actual development side of it, but this is more kind of the straight security. But compliance is becoming a huge conversation. We all have heard about GDPR and the fact that it's ushering in basically a new era of data security and compliance, because now there are a slew of US-based and other country-based regulations that are coming into play. We've covered a lot of it on Security Boulevard. But it means companies are going to start losing a whole lot of money by being non-compliant, and I think companies really need to consider that in their security strategies. We've got compliance, as I said, is a huge issue, and then you also need to consider how mobile the workforce is, and then not only that, but how much information they actually need to access from their mobile devices. And then also, data speaks volumes. Look at the past incident data, see where things went wrong, and what you can do to make that, to solve that problem, or at least to mitigate it to the best of your ability. All right, moving on. So what's next
just
then?
One thing, Charlene, hey, Charlene, I just wanted to jump on one point that you made about compliance. I don't know if that's the next slide or not, but one of the benefits of DevOps and a really highly automated CD pipeline that we see with our customers is it actually reduces the burden of meeting compliance obligations, right? Because now you've got a really well-built audit trail. You're capturing information about who did what and when, and as long as you have a good way to store and retrieve that information, some of the kind of compliance burdens that we had in the past actually go away by implementing a really good CD pipeline.
Okay. All right. Great. So that was actually one of the things that the whole GDPR conversation I think is going to be in the next year is going to continue to be high on the radar screens of many companies as they work to reduce their their viability for compliance or for non-compliance. And it will be interesting, I think, to see how that impacts the application development process as a whole, and maybe forces a lot more companies to shift left. Rick, what do you think? Do you think that GDPR and compliance in general is going to have a bigger impact on security in the next year moving forward?
No, eventually it will. They're
Yeah.
struggling. Like I'll be
Yeah.
honest, I'm over in that market a lot. And so what I would tell you about GDPR and what I've heard overwhelmingly is if you had a mature security program and you're already doing a lot of the things you should do, GDPR probably isn't going to have much of a burden to your security team. That being said, it's been largely disruptive. Like when a new compliance effort comes in, you do as a security team wind up shifting work. Like that's just the way it is because you got to stay in business, right? So, so while I do think eventually it will, I think short term it's actually going to have an impact to some of the tactical projects that are going on, and then especially to like incident response efforts and proactive battling of the adversaries when they're in your environment. That's going to be tough to pull off with the same number of resources.
So do you think it's a lot of noise then? Are they going to look at it more as, kind of just one more thing we've got to deal with, or do you think they're going to be serious about it though?
They are serious. Like, I mean, it's for serious. They're looking at it as this is just the beginning. This is a program that's going to change over time. And so I would say it is forcing maturity on a bunch of organizations that didn't want to mature their practices, right? Just didn't make the investment, didn't do the things. And then I would tell you secondarily for the populace of those, especially when you look at like the UK, it's very positive. I mean, they're taking ownership of their data. Right. And so I think just fundamentally having the premise that a human being owns the data they generate is a cool thing for all of us in the end. So I'm hoping with some of the other regulations in the States, it'll have an impact over here too.
Okay. Eric, what are your thoughts? Do you think compliance is going to change fundamentally the way organizations approach security?
I think I'd actually agree with Rick's core points, which my takeaway was that it no, but yet it's still disruptive. The one positive form of disruption that I'm seeing with GDPR is it's acting as a catalyst for organizations to address what are more complex cryptographic issues within the software that they're building. As I'm sure we all know, when you do something as simple as you think something as simple as changing an algorithm from one version to another, there's a dramatic toll on that because you're always dealing with live production data. And so that sort of issue often gets pushed to the side, which is probably why we see very few cryptographic issues getting fixed. But with GDPR, we are seeing that as sort of ammo, if you will, to help raise the priority of such issues. And we're starting to see some migration and improvements in that space around data and encryption and so forth. So I view that as sort of a positive outlook it's one perspective of a positive outlook of the GDPR.
Okay, great. So I guess the last point that I wanted to bring up is the fact that we are going to see a lot more security technologies that involve new and different ways of going about securing applications, data, endpoints. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are two big ones. They're looking to shift security basically from prevention to real-time threat detection. So I don't know if that means that we've actually kind of determined that we're never going to be so far ahead of the bad guys that we're ever going to be able to rest on our laurels. But realizing that a lot of what we're going to continue to do in security is be reactive, and there's that's just the way things are going to be. So, I'm interested in hearing where you guys think maybe artificial intelligence and machine learning can help security the most. Tim, why don't we start with you, if you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of promise in these technologies for vendors, certainly. People who are trying to build products that are going to help other organizations with some of the security challenges that they have. So we as vendors in this space are always trying to solve problems for folks. And if it's something of observability, for example, when we're in a complex cloud environment where we have, tens or hundreds of different interfaces and systems talking to each other, lots of data gets produced, we can leverage some of these technologies to create better products for our customers so that they can, find better signals in the noise that's produced by all of those systems. So obviously, I'm coming from a vendor perspective. I'm excited about these technologies, but ultimately, they're going to allow us to build better solutions for our customers. So they're going to get a lot more insight and meaning and value out of the data this ocean of data that's produced by the new tools and systems that they have.
All right, great. Rick, what about you?
Yeah, look, I think machine learning is certainly in use today. I love what we're talking about, which is like, I'm a defender and I have infinity pieces of data, because now, like, even if you looked at someone who deployed like an endpoint product with better visibility, right? Well, now I got all the network logs and I got all these signals coming from the endpoint, and now how do I find the needle in the needle stack, right? I think machine learning has a big part to play in that. I think when we think about like AI, we're generally confusing a couple of topics and like coming up with sort of what we had at the DARPA Grand Challenge last year, right? Which is like an offensive system that identifies vulnerabilities and one that goes and fixes them. And look, we're way off from that, but I think today, I can tell you detection is better as a result of machine learning, right? It just is. And so now we're collecting massive data sets, and we've got to get through it, and we got to get an actionable item to a defender to go do something about, or a system to block. And I just don't see another way to get through that giant amount of data without machine learning.
Yeah, that's a good point. Eric, what about you? What do you think?
Machine learning is actually, it hits close to home from the perspective of a vendor. So like Tim, part of my perspective is very much from a vendor, but I think the other part of this is, as a user or a consumer of white hat security type of data in a previous life. So prior to joining a product company, I was a consultant, and it was my responsibility to help consume results from scanning and testing services and tools, weed out the true positives from the false positives, and provide and communicate only the true positives to developers in the context that they want to understand. Using machine learning is critical for achieving DevSecOps when you are in the CI/CD pipeline. If you get to the point where you can start integrating security testing as an automated thing, automated process in that build pipeline, and that build is dependent on the outcome of that test, i.e. it will wait, right? It's not a background job, it's a forefront job. The results from that test have to be accurate. The easiest way to lose credibility with anybody is to put results in front of them that they must act on, only to find out those results are invalid, right? So if you break a build, developer, and the result is failed to build because of a false positive, you're going to lose a lot of credibility. And so for us, investment in machine learning is a significant area for us, and we're seeing a lot of value from it. In that the results we're providing are automatically verified to be true based on our machine learning models. And so I see this as a continued area of investment for security, particularly application security, but really it would fit into any aspect of security when you have to present results to someone else. So I'm pretty excited about seeing where this could go. I wouldn't necessarily say I drank the Kool-Aid that is artificial intelligence and machine learning, but I'm encouraged.
All right, great. It seems like machine learning and artificial intelligence are kind of natural evolutions for security, given the amount of data, as you said, Rick, as the amount of data that's being collected. I don't actually think that we can advance security without the help of AI and machine learning. That's my 2 cents. So.
Yeah, and then we still got to address the skills gap. And I don't know, the estimate's 5 million to 27 million cybersecurity professionals that aren't in seats, right? And so what's faster, graduating people or writing code? I don't know. We're going to see who's going to win, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, we have about 5 minutes left in the hour. I'm going to throw it out, see if anybody has any questions for us. Matuz, we do see your question, and I'm sure somebody from Carbon Black will be able to connect with you offline to discuss that. He's writing an application, wants API information. So, if anybody else has a question for any of our panelists, now would be the time to go ahead and submit the question. While we're waiting to see if anybody does, I do want to remind the audience that today's event is being recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, you will be able to listen to it. Or if you just want to listen to it again, that's fine with me. You'll be able to listen to it on demand. We are going to be sending out an email after the event that includes a link to not only to the webinar on demand, but also to the ebook that we discussed at the beginning of the presentation. So everybody will be getting that. The webinar is also going to be living on the Security Boulevard website, so you can always go there to check it out. Just look under the webinar tab, and it should be there, right there under the on-demand section. And we also have a ton of other webinars there, both upcoming and on demand, so take a look around. Hopefully there'll be one or two to pique your interest. I'm not seeing any questions come in, so at this point, I do want to thank Eric Sheridan, Rick McElroy, and Tim Buntel for joining me today. Guys, great information. Thanks so much for having the conversation with me.
Really glad to be here. Appreciate the chat.
Excellent. All right, great.
Thanks.
I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. And this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.